Okay, in this section we're going to talk about glial cells, or glia. They're the supporting cells of the nervous system. Glia is from the Greek word for glue, so it was, you sort of think of them holding the nervous system together, even though they don't physically do that. But they they arise from the same neural stem cells that neurons do. So there's a little blurb at the end of the PowerPoint, at the end of the chapter, where they talk about neural stem cells and sort of the potential for treatment of neurological disorders. It hasn't been realized yet, but because you take a neural stem cell, it can differentiate into anything. So if you're missing Schwan cells because you have a demyelinating disease, like MS or Guillain-Barré, maybe they can find a way to stimulate neural stem cells to differentiate into those cells. And so the huge potential for treatment with stem cells, kind of interesting. But glial cells and neurons come from the same neural stem cells in development, and then they develop into their individual functions. So glial cells are categorized by size and function. So there are macroglia, which are the big ones, and microglia, which are the small ones. So when we talk about microglial cells, they act as sort of the immune system for the central nervous system. They are activated during development and following injury, infection, or disease, just like our immune system in the rest of our body, which is activated during development and following injury, infection, or disease. So it's very similar, except the nervous system is special and it has its own immune system. So when cells die or are injured or are infected, they send out protein signals that attract a microglia to the site, and the microglia clean up and remove debris, just like the macrophages do in the rest of the body. So when you have cellular damage and infection or disease, anything like that, in the rest of the body, the cells send out protein signals which call macrophages to the area to clean up and remove debris. So, wow, that's neat. But they're specialized cells for the nervous system. So the macroglia are classified into three groups: astrocytes, oligodendrocytes, and Schwan cells. So I'm going to switch to the Canvas classroom now because I like the pictures. So oligodendrocytes and Schwan cells are similar. They both form myelin sheaths, but the oligodendrocytes are in the central nervous system and Schwan cells are in the peripheral nervous system. They form that myelin sheath around the axons to insulate the electrical conduction, and they allow for that saltatory conduction to propagate the active potential faster. Schwan cells are also phagocytic, meaning they're like the macrophages where they clean up debris. Schwan cells can wrap around more than one axon. Oligodendrocytes wrap around several axons from different neurons. So they do the same thing, but they do it slightly differently in the CNS versus the PNS. So there's some pictures here about with the Schwan cell, and you can see it's got that sheath wrapped around and around and around the axon. That is a fully myelinated cell. The axons just running through part of the Schwan cell is considered an unmyelinated axon because it's not fully insulated, if you can think of it that way. So astrocytes, in the central nervous system, they help remove waste products and residual neurotransmitters. They have a nutritive function, and they aid in communication between neurons. So they actually have little synapses where they communicate with each other, but it's not a synapse like between neurons where there's an actual gap, a synaptic cleft. They actually join together in their plasma membranes and communicate. So a lot of our neurotransmitters, when they're released in the synaptic cleft, they get reuptaken, I guess is the word, back into the cell, and the astrocytes do a lot of that work. So some of our medications like Prozac and Zoloft, the sort of the mood-altering medications. They're selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs. So they probably, I would imagine, although I don't know this specifically, but that they affect the astrocyte's ability to remove that residual neurotransmitter so it stays in the synaptic cleft longer. Um, the kind of interesting stuff, kind of stuff you see every day, ads on TV, Prozac and Zoloft. There you go, it affects your astrocytes. So there's a little, in this diagram, it shows the linkage between the neurons and the capillaries. So it actually takes nutrients from the blood supply and brings it to the neurons. And it provides protection. So the astrocytes are what we refer to as the blood-brain barrier. So there are a lot of things that don't cross into the brain in order to just protect the brain, and that those astrocytes, they do the job of forming that blood-brain barrier. So if the neuron went directly to the capillary, anything that was in your bloodstream, like an infection or a excess blood sugar or any other thing that's wrong in your bloodstream, is going to get right to the neuron. So that astrocyte kind of gives you a middleman. It's that blood-brain barrier. They can help protect the nervous system. Kind of neat. So these are, it's a little micrograph of those microglia, which are the little phagocytes that are immobilized after injury. And they're the little cleanup crew, which is kind of cool. Unfortunately, they've found that in some diseases with dementia, there's abnormal activation of the microglia, and so it's the breakdown of more than really should be broken down causes the release of toxic compounds in the neural environment. So there is such thing as too much of a good thing, I guess. So interesting stuff about glia. The increased concentration of glia might boost our ability to think and process information. Einstein's brain showed an increased number of glial cells in areas of higher thought. The average cerebral cortex has a 2 glia to 1 neuron. Rodents have 0.4 to 1, worms 0.7 to 1, and dolphins 3 to 1. So, I don't know, dolphins, they might be smarter than us. But, you know, after Einstein died, they removed his brain 7.5 hours after his death. And it's been the subject of much study, and people wanted to analyze Einstein's brain and see why he was so smart, why he's so much smarter than the rest of us. And it's pretty neat that they kind of mapped it out, and they said that regions involved in speech and language in Einstein's brain were smaller, and regions involved in numerical and spatial processing were larger, and he had an increased number of glial cells. So pretty cool stuff. That's from a book that came out in 2009 that's called The Other Brain from Dementia to Schizophrenia, and it's really a good book if you want to read it in your spare time. There's a little video on glial cells, which I don't think says anything new that besides what I've already covered. It's the Australian guy or whatever, so he says glial cells funny. I get a kick out of his accent, so if you want to hear an Australian accent, there you go. So we are not really going to talk much about neural stem cells, except what I've already said. I just think it's kind of an interesting that they are involved in forming memories and learning new tasks. So there's still stuff going on in our brain. Our brains are still developing day by day, so we don't want to take our brains for granted. All right, the next section and the last section in this chapter, we will talk about some diseases that affect the cells of the nervous system.